The content you're about to hear may be graphic in nature. Listener discretion is advised.
Oh, how I wonder what it's like to relax. See the sky down under. Hope my plans collapse. Oh, how I'm under the surface of my tears, falling down asunder the meaning of my years.
This is True Crime XS.
I guess everybody is following this Carmelo Anthony thing and Lindsay Clancy. I saw that the retrial was denied for the kid down in Texas, the Carmelo Anthony case, which I think is the right call overall. Have you followed anything with the Lindsay Clancy thing? I know you've been busy putting together a series too, so...
Yeah, I haven't followed anything that's currently happening. I'm stuck in La La Land.
Yeah, I get really disappointed when people are like only following those things. So I tend to avoid them for coverage here. And also, there's just so many other stories happening. I don't know why it happens that like I will some Mondays wake up and like go to like listen to something for my commute or listen to something like first thing in the morning, and I can thumb through like 4 or 5 of my regular podcasts and they'll all be covering the same thing. And that's weird to me. It was like that during Karen Reed too. Like everybody suddenly had an opinion on Karen Reed. And at one point there were quite a few people had an opinion on Delphi. But I guess I don't like it, but at the same time I get ideas from it because I'll see something and I'm like, oh, I got to come back to that because I want to cover that. And like, I want to cover that. And I know there's not some kind of Wikipedia summary and I'm aware that I'm going to dive into court documents and be reading a bunch of different things. But I guess that's where some of the ideas come from. And if I had to like name this series, I probably would have done something more like Dirty Gavels. Because I was working on a Dirty Badges series that we'll probably put together later in the fall. And this is not exactly that because some of these things are pretty legit. But I've noticed that the U.S. is like revving up their execution engine in a lot of different states and federally. And it'll be a blip. Like something major will happen and it'll be a blip. And I wanted to cover a couple different things related to that. Like one of them was this really old case where the U.S. had executed 2 people in a day. And I was like, I'm going to come back around to that. And then August 13th rolled around. So August 13th of this year, so 2026, it's a Thursday, just a totally normal day. There are 3 people all executed by lethal injections on the same day. And one of them was for 2003 murder. One of them we're going to talk about here in a second. It just zoomed right on through. It's for a 2021 murder. And the other one's for a 1985 murder. And so if people are wondering, like, just generally how often this happens in the U.S., it's not exactly like solar eclipse level interesting. But the previous time that this occurred was 3 executions being like on a single calendar day in the United States. That's the event I'm talking about, was January 7th, 2010. So that was Ohio, Texas, and Louisiana. And I thought for sure when I looked at like these cases, one of those was going to be in there. And then I was like, okay, maybe Florida. None of those are in there. Texas and Florida were like, we'll sit this one out. So that's 16 years, 8 months and a week, give or take. So that's, that's kind of a big deal that like here we are in 2026 and we have 3 death row inmates that all die on the same day. And I've changed my opinion on the death penalty over the years. I have and I don't know that I can qualify it or quantify it with a good conversation, because I kind of have to feel like I'm 100% certain this person did it. And not only that, I kind of need it on video with DNA matching. And maybe that's just the media that I consume. I've had numerous cases where I look at them and I go, the system is so broken, which we're going to get to that later in this. I think you and I sat down and looked at this, and there was so much information sitting here. I kind of went, that's 2 parts. So that might be the second part of what we're doing here. How do you feel currently about the death penalty?
It's really hard to say, generally speaking. I would say that I agree that it's a case-by-case basis. And most of the time, it seems like some of the really old people who have been executed already are some of the cases where, we've covered, where it's very obvious that an execution does not need to take place and that the whole trial needs to be redone because it's not a death penalty situation. We have to be able to look at the whole case, right? And then I have to I don't necessarily need it on video or DNA. I mean, yeah, a lot of times that would be nice, but seeing cases in hindsight has made me realize how skewed death penalty cases can be and how it's questionable as to the guilt of a lot of people who have been executed.
Yeah. And I think you said you needed to review the whole case file before you made a decision on was it good or bad anymore. I think that's probably true for me too, at this point in life.
Right. And so I guess my point would be, I absolutely believe in the death penalty as a punishment for someone who is guilty of committing a capital crime. However, sometimes it can be questionable, right? If they actually were factually guilty versus having been convicted because of something stupid.
Yeah, and I think the other problem, I would still have faith in the police. Forget the system and the fact that the system does what the system's going to do. I don't have faith in police anymore. I do have some faith in some of it maybe turning around, but there's so many instances where take this 1985 case, for instance, which we'll get to it. It's kind of the middle case today. That's so long ago that I'm positive there could have been something corrupt or inept about the investigation itself.
Right.
And I look at that and that bothers me that is 1985. Here we are. We're 41 years in the future. And I don't have much more faith today in what's going on. What I do have a little more faith in 2026 is that the ability to look at a lot of information is definitely going to surpass 1985. And
you mean our ability to look at a lot of information?
You and me, human beings that are constituents who vote for judges and who vote for district attorneys. I think that you and I can look at something, and that includes our audience too. There's smart people listening to true crime media every day that can make educated opinions based on the availability of information. And I'm not talking about the TikTok, YouTube, documentary, podcast realm necessarily. I'm saying if you dig into something, you can find what the defense and the prosecution has said about a case now in a way that you can maybe come to some satisfactory conclusions, or at least know what else you would need to know about something. You can look at it and be why does the defense say this and the prosecution say this, and this never gets cleared up? We recently talked again about Zachary Adams in the state of Tennessee. And I think you and I have known all along that if that case gets prosecuted 40 years ago, Jack Adams is already executed. Forget the life in prison thing. He just goes down.
Right. And honestly, that's a case for the ages as far as I'm concerned. And it's very, very concerning. I would not live in Tennessee.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that's strange is like we do have more choices, although it's rapidly getting more expensive to live anywhere. We have more choices of where to go and where to live and what positions to put ourselves in. I think it's pretty rare still for a person to be investigated, convicted, and sentenced to death without having made some kind of choice along the way that like got them into a situation where they're innocent.
Yeah, I think it's more what we've seen recently where like, you know, the conviction, a child died, but it wasn't a murder, right?
Yeah.
I do see like where previously junk science type things that came forward and they have a lot of blood on their hands from the jump as far as how many people were executed because supposedly there was evidence that wouldn't pass scrutiny today because it's been disproven.
Yeah.
I would like to think that it's only going to be the worst of the worst, right?
Yeah.
It's only going to be cases that they're completely sure of what occurred. But like you said about Zach Adams, I don't know what trial they participated in because I watched it much, much later and I saw all the evidence and I can't figure out why on earth they think that they've convicted the right person.
Yeah. And, you know, I currently find myself in an environment where a lot of times the jury trial part of things, first of all, they're so rare and people don't understand how rare they are. Everybody thinks like if I got in trouble and I did this, I would go before a jury. The likelihood of that happening is very rare. I think the other day I ran it by available statistics, and it's less than 1% of United States cases actually go to jury trial anymore. And I say that set of words very specifically, jury trial. There are more bench trials, and there's a lot of like lower level trials that happen where it's just a judge. But less than 1% of cases in the United States in 2026 go to a jury trial, meaning in your jurisdiction, ever how many of your peers, be it 6, 10, 12, or 18, come in and decide your fate. The overwhelming majority of jurisdictions have trials that are 12 people who have to vote unanimously, both on your innocence or guilt, and then also on your punishment recommendation to a judge. That's the overwhelming majority. That's not true in every jurisdiction, but that's the overwhelming majority.
Is that for violent felonies or is there any other classification?
That's everything. That's everything.
Okay.
That is every type of criminal jury trial. About 94% of cases today either end in a dismissal, which is a very small number, it's like about 6%, or a plea agreement of some kind, including deferred prosecution agreements and all of those things. It's everything. Then you have a pretty, the number of bench trials is actually more. And I didn't know that. That statistic is because certain jurisdictions allow you to basically think where I live, you would jump from district to superior court and then have a bench trial in superior court on a violent or maybe not felony. And the judge decides your fate and your sentencing. That's an election that people can take in many jurisdictions.
Do you think that comes from the attorney?
It can come from last minute decisions. Like some people get a bench trial based on the judge that they draw for the day of trial, because that system is largely meant to keep us from having more corruption. So yeah, I think a lot of defense attorneys spend a lot of time convincing defendant clients of many things. And like testify, not to testify, strategies for defense. I think bench trials under the right circumstances can result in a favorable outcome for a defendant who might not get it from a jury. But the opposite is also true. That a judge can know.
I was going to say, I'm not sure. The idea behind a jury trial, at least in my assessment of planning one, would be that you only have to convince one person, right?
Yeah. Right.
And when the one person is a judge and that's the only person that's going to be convinced either way, to me, that could be.
Yeah, and so much of what sets up for a trial. I mean, like I think judges largely consider jury trial or bench trial the outcome of a case to be a foregone conclusion based on things that the jury never sees. And that's all the pretrial motions, your probable cause hearings, and everything that happens ahead of time. But obviously, since we're talking about these executions, obviously something happened there, because frequently, and it varies in these stories, frequently when you get to the point that somebody's being executed, a lot of stuff has happened, including a lot of appeals, a lot of post-conviction wrangling has gone on. Plus, there's the potential for petitions for clemency or petitions for evidence review. There's all sorts of things that happen at so many different levels. I think the system has got to the point it's like, well, somebody will catch it somewhere. And so trials can be a foregone conclusion, assuming that's going to happen later.
Yeah, I wouldn't be betting on that.
Well, so a couple statistics for you, and we'll see what you think of these. And largely this comes from PBS, Death Penalty Information Center. I pulled from a couple of foreign sources, like one sentence, but then almost all of them were able to be backed up in the U.S. First statistic is in 2025, the U.S. total for federal system and state system had 47 executions. So that's a lot. But 47 executions, that's 2025. That's last year. What do you think we're on track for this year?
I have no idea.
Do you have any idea how many total executions we have in 2026 so far?
No, I don't.
23.
Okay.
All male.
Okay.
One state leads the pack with 13 executions. Who do you think it is?
I don't know.
Florida. Florida is on a record-setting pace this year. So back to the executions I dragged you in here to talk about. The first one, I'm going to kind of go in order. I think I'm going to go in order by the time of day they were executed. This is an Oklahoma execution. It happens in 10:13 in the morning. Have you ever heard of Carlos Cuesta Rodriguez?
Not before we started getting ready to cover this.
So his is interesting. I pulled his United States Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit. It's a February 22nd, 2019 appeal. It's docketed from case number 16-6315. So this is like when you move to Fed, okay? Like you move to federal court.
Right.
And I'm just going to give you like the overview of the crime itself, and then we're going to talk about Carlos. And all three of these, there's very different coverage of them out there. This is technically a habeas case that we're like kind of pulling from. It's ultimately Carlos Cuesta Rodriguez's attorneys, even though I'm going to say his name because it's, the defendant. It's his attorneys. In this instance, that's going to be Michael Lieberman, who's an assistant federal public defender, and he is working with Randy Bowman and Thomas Hurd, H-I-R-D. They are facing off with the Assistant Attorney General of Oklahoma. It's a woman named Caroline Hunt. And then she has another attorney, Mike Hunter, who at the time was the Attorney General of Oklahoma. They are working on the briefs here. They're the prosecution filing this part of it. But the focus I'm going to use is the background of events. So Olympia Fisher is going to be the decedent here, or the victim. But she and her adult daughter, Katya Chacon, they live with Carlos Cuesta Rodriguez in a home that Olympia and Carlos had purchased together. So the year following the home purchase was stressful for Carlos and Olympia, which I think that's a time that is stressful for a lot of people. Olympia was working long hours as a moving company packer, and Carlos got it in the back of his mind that she was having an affair. So whenever Olympia and her daughter would leave the house, Carlos was getting into what my wife would call interrogation mode. He wanted to know where they were going, what are they doing, and the relationship deteriorated to the point that even though they've just bought this home together, the two of them both are looking at each other going, somebody's got to move out. And they consider this investment into their home and the ownership of this home to be a situation where it's obviously going to be the other one, right?
Yep.
May 20th, 2003, Olympia goes to the local police station and she makes a complaint about domestic violence in the home and domestic abuse. The interviewing officer could see that she had bruising on her right upper arm and there was bruising on her stomach. But when Olympia realizes that this person who is at the police station and involved in this is going to arrest Carlos and document these bruises, and there's going to be a whole court thing, she leaves the police station. It's described in court that she fled the police station. So that's May 20th. 11 days later, May 31st, 2003, Carlos calls Olympia on her cell phone. She answers. She says, look, I am working. Carlos says he had gone by her place of work earlier and he knew that she wasn't there. So, according to the court documents, believing that she was cheating on him, he goes home and he drinks some tequila and he takes a nap. Around 10 p.m., Olympia's daughter comes home and the house is dark. She sees an empty bottle of tequila sitting on a table. It has a note on it. The note is written on the back of an envelope. And it says, fuck you bitches and puntas. Goodbye. So she realized that Carlos is home and she tries to get in touch with her mom. So she's not able to get Olympia on the phone. She leaves the house and she goes and finds Olympia as she's getting off of her work. So the two of them go to McDonald's and then they go home. They made a plan while they were at McDonald's, and that plan was they were going to pack up and they're going to leave. But they get there, it's late. Olympia and probably her daughter are both exhausted. And they decide, you know what, we'll do this tomorrow. So Carlos is in the master bedroom. Olympia's in the guest bedroom. And her daughter is in her room, like the daughter's room. Around 4:30 in the morning, the daughter awakes to Olympia and Carlos arguing. So loud sounds in the house, loud voices. She goes to the bedroom where she can see the two of them fighting, and she convinces Olympia, her mother, to come back with her to her own bedroom and basically says to Carlos, leave us alone. But Carlos is in a mood. He follows the women into the daughter's bedroom. He continues fighting with Olympia. Olympia picks up a phone. Carlos grabs it. He tosses it out of her reach. And at the same time that this is happening, he pulls out a handgun and he shoots Olympia in the face. In fact, right in her right eye. The daughter gets a baseball bat from under the bed. She's trying to hit the gun out of Carlos's hand. He grabs the bat as she swings it. The bat hits the floor. The daughter runs away, gets to a neighbor's house and calls 911. So at this point, Olympia has been shot in the face. Carlos drags her down the hallway to the master bedroom. She's fighting. She's struggling, despite the fact that she has been shot in the eye. So by 4:41, the first police officers arrive on scene. This is within 2 minutes of being dispatched by 911. They approach the house. They hear Olympia screaming. She's banging on a bedroom door. To them, it sounds like she's trying to escape. The house's windows and doors are all covered with burglar bars that prevent her escape. And not only do they prevent her escaping, they prevent the police getting in. So the police are trying to kick in the front door. They can't kick past the security on the door. It just won't open. So they then hear another gunshot. This gunshot is going to be a second fatal wound to Olympia Fisher's left eye. So Carlos is armed. Police are fairly certain, because the kicking, banging, and screaming has stopped, that it's probably the case that whoever that person is that got shot and has now been shot again is dead. Nevertheless, they bring in a SWAT team, a tactical team. Police hostage negotiator starts trying to get Carlos to come outside, and they use this tool called a ram jam. It is a specialized type of ram that will break the burglar bars and allow entry to the front door. They end up arresting Carlos. They take him to the police station. He starts giving statements to detectives as soon as he gets there and talks to them the whole next day. In these interviews, he admits he shot Olympia, but he claims that the first shot was accidental. And you know what? I kind of believe that that is a possibility. Like, he pointed it at her eye and like gun went off kind of thing. Doesn't matter whether it's accidental or on purpose, because he certainly finished her off with a shot to the other eye. So the state of Oklahoma arrests them. They charge him with first-degree murder, and the prosecutors announce they're going to seek the death penalty. He's admitted to everything. There's not a whole lot you can do at this point. Would you agree?
I would agree.
So the guilt phase is the first part of any trial. The court brings in testimony from the medical examiners. I think there's a couple of doctors that come in. And one of the things that's at odds in the appeal is that, like, one doctor performs the autopsy. Another doctor ends up being the one sort of recapping what the findings were. And that is one of the things that they're going to look at. Dr. Jeffrey Gofton, he testifies based on a report of Dr. Fred Jordan. And, you know, somebody's been shot twice in the eyes and somebody's admitted to doing it. It's not like some crazy conspiracy that she was shot in the head. She died from the shots to the head. And you may have someone who is brought up from the other side who starts talking about, like, other specific things that might have happened to this person. So regardless of, like, the actual cause of her not living anymore, the gunshot wounds to her face that had damaged her body are the manner of death. And that's homicidal violence.
Right. And there was basically a witness.
There's a witness and all these admissions. Like, he says, it's my gun, I shot her.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, this is pretty straightforward.
Yeah. So the defense comes up with nothing. And the jury, at the end of this phase, the guilt phase, they find Carlos Cueso Rodriguez guilty of murder in the first degree. So the defense has basically placed most of their case on the penalty part. That means they didn't think they had much of a case because the client has talked multiple times to the police and made overarching admissions to having executed a woman in his own home, in her own home. And I don't think you have a lot of hope there. Maybe you get some person that hangs the jury. I don't think you were ever going into it thinking, oh yeah, we're getting a not guilty on this.
Yeah, it made me wonder why there wasn't some sort of plea negotiated.
I mean, sometimes if you've got the death penalty on the table in first degree murder and, like, multiple admissions by the defendant, I don't know that you need to offer much of a plea. But you're right.
That's probably true. And now, to be fair, I feel like there could have been an argument for second degree murder here. Like, I realize there is an argument for first degree murder and he was convicted on it, but I feel like a defense might have been that it was more of a heat of passion type thing, right? Now, he did shoot her twice, so...
I think it's the second bullet. I think the first bullet gets you second degree.
Well, sure. And I'm just saying that if they were going to put forth a defense, like, it could have been that. But I understand that it's it can also be first degree. But I do see this as more of a snapped type murder than like anything. I think that if there wasn't heat of the moment type energy here, this wouldn't have happened, you know?
Oh, I'm with you. I 100%. It's the tequila. The tequila that he had
and
all day.
Stress,
the stress of that, whatever is making him so paranoid about this. I look at it and I go, Oklahoma, drug use. I could see like a lot of things happening here. That's not really, it's not brought up in a way that like we are able to understand it during the guilt phase, according to these documents, but I also don't think it would have excused a second shot. Which I rarely jump on board with that, but this guy admitted to it. I kind of agree with what the defense did in terms of trying to mitigate it for a life sentence. But I think that might have been your only plea offer.
It just seems to me like, well, I don't really think that people plead to the death penalty. I think that has to go to trial. But I just wondered, like, if they could have skipped the trial, could they have just had life in prison, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes I think that that's worthwhile, especially in this type of situation, because now, granted, I'm not saying that he didn't deserve the death penalty, because I wasn't in the position, that the state was to seek it, and they saw the crime for what it was. But to me, this is almost a textbook domestic case, right?
Yeah. This is like, it's a little more graphic the way the court addresses it, but yeah, it is a textbook.
And
domestic.
textbook domestic cases, I find it hard to get them to get to the capital level, to the death penalty level. I'm not saying that they can't, like, whatever your prerogative is, like, you can absolutely accomplish that with any case, right? And somebody wanted to go for the death penalty here and felt like it was worthwhile. I'm not saying it wasn't worthwhile. I just don't know that I would have gone that way with this particular case because of it being textbook domestic. You could say like, oh, we're going to teach a lesson here, except like, what would the lesson be? Don't ever be in a domestic relationship where you might have something like this stir up and happen, because that's the only lesson you could really get out of it, right?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think these cases, I don't know, maybe the argument was over life versus life without parole. And like, that's why they don't come to a plea agreement. I don't know that you have a whole, if like they just come to you with life without parole, I don't know that you like have a lot of. It
would have been a really good idea for them to have taken that. So I don't think that there was even an offer. I think that they were set on getting the death penalty. And, I can't really recall Oklahoma in the early single digit 2000s. Like, I have no idea like what the state's prerogative was in doing that, right? Maybe it was the family pushing for it. Somebody had some sort of reasoning behind it, and it was their choice to make, right? And they were successful. And I can't say anything bad about that. It's just, I feel like this could have gone a lot of different ways, just depending on who's driving the ship, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and they get stuck in the penalty phase here. The defense, they bring in mitigating circumstances. They talk about him using alcohol and other drugs. They talk about him having a troubled childhood. They talk about his experiences immigrating from Cuba to Florida. And they paint him as like this really good guy, hardworking, family man, who had a substance and alcohol problem that pushed him over. But they have trouble. Like, they put a lot of money into this guy's defense. So the money comes from the fact that, like, at that time in 2003, because you're talking about like Oklahoma's death penalty stance, they had trouble getting records from Cuba to document something that had happened to Carlos Cuesto Rodriguez. There was a doctor who came, Dr. James Choca, and this is the mitigation expert in the penalty phase where this guy potentially is going to get the death penalty. He's testifying about an accident that Carlos has had where he has hit the windshield and fractured his skull and then had to have a metal plate put into his skull to hold it all together. So the doctor tells the jury about this injury that takes place later on where Carlos is working at a lumber yard. He's driving a tractor and he falls and gets dragged a few yards by this tractor and someone's able to stop it. And they're able to kind of point to his substance abuse as being part of this. But the jury hears some of it, and there's some argument that maybe something was even more wrong with Carlos because of some of the injuries he's had. The jury doesn't get that, and they ultimately find that he needs to go, and the way that we're going to do that is this death penalty is going to happen. So they make that recommendation. The court holds it up. He goes through all these appeals, which I think is kind of a waste for different reasons. And that points me back to, we should have just done this as a plea agreement, like you were saying.
And that's my main point, I guess, would be that ultimately in a lot of cases, I have absolutely no problem with someone who is looking at the death penalty also just being in jail for their life without the possibility of parole, right?
Yeah.
I really don't care either way. And it seems from the family's perspective, we all know that once the death penalty is on the table, and then if it's adjudicated to be that the defendant is going to be put to death, it's almost like the family never gets to move forward because it's just a constant reminder because there's constantly litigation happening, right?
Right.
And so with a plea deal, it could have skipped a lot of that, but ultimately it doesn't matter. It's just something I thought of.
Oh, well, I think that is a valid way to look at all of this. I mean, the prosecutor gets very zealous in all of this. The comments that he makes from the trial itself, the prosecutor says, and this is a quote, "And as far as them tearfully pleading for his life there, I say to you on behalf of the state, ladies and gentlemen, shame on him for putting all of these people in that position. Shame on him for making them act as a human shield between justice and himself." So the defense tries to counter that. They come up with a lot of stuff. In the end, the jury finds that there are two aggravating circumstances that make this a capital case, and that the prosecutor is right. The first is that the murder is especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel because of that second shot. And the second is that Carlos Cuesto Rodriguez posed a continuing threat to society. He is formally sentenced to death. These appeals go on for 23 years, even to the point that earlier this year, on August 13th, 2026, in Oklahoma, up until 10:13 a.m., there was the possibility that he might get a stay. And then he didn't. I had the, time to go back and look through several different articles about him. The Oklahoma Voice had the most interesting headline about Carlos. They said, "Man facing execution says he doesn't deserve nor want any mercy." It was by Courtney Bell. It's back in July. It's about a month before the execution. This is Oklahoma City. It says the Pardon and Parole Board on Tuesday rejected the clemency request for a man facing execution after he told the Pardon and Parole Board he did not deserve nor want clemency. Carlos Cuesto Rodriguez is 70 years old. He said he only attended his clemency hearing to apologize to the daughters of Olympia Fisher, the woman that he killed in 2003. And the board then voted 3-1 against recommending clemency, paving the way for Cuesto Rodriguez to be executed on August 13th by lethal injection, which he was, with the exception of saying in English that I don't want any clemency and I don't want any mercy. Cuesto Rodriguez addressed the board and the Fisher's family in Spanish. A translator sitting next to him at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, where he was attending the hearing remotely, translated. I know that nothing I say will be enough to erase her pain, to offer some kind of comfort or get her back. But I do want to tell you that I regret it and I am truly remorseful from the bottom of my heart. My time has come. I want to leave. I want to leave in peace. And if I am forgiven someday, well, I will be forgiven. But it's time for me to pay for the things that I did. I find it very difficult to argue with him, to be honest.
Well, and honestly, that's exactly what would have got him clemency.
Yeah.
Because if you read on just a little bit further, Robert Rivas II, who is the Pardon and Parole Board chair, he said he was somewhat inclined to vote for clemency, but chose not to after hearing the defendant's request, specifically to, that he didn't want or deserve mercy. And so that's an interesting take. This case is really interesting all around, right?
Yeah.
Because like I said previously, this was a textbook domestic case, and some of the elements of a textbook domestic case are, it's love that turns into the kind of hate you can only have for somebody that you love, and then instantaneous regret for killing them, right? I mean, it's tale as old as time. Every single domestic situation that happens is I would say with romantic partners, at least, most of the time they would take it back in a second, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we hear here, right? That's basically what he's saying. There, I'm so sorry I did it. There's nothing I can take it back. I don't deserve mercy. Go ahead and kill me. And it follows up with the how I see textbook domestic cases playing out. I do think it's odd because most of the time those cases aren't death penalty cases, right?
Right. And this is usually not a death penalty case. Yes. Exactly.
And then what he's saying is exactly what I would predict someone in this position, having it been a textbook domestic case, saying at the end of, they won't be being put to death, but in this case, every single case, I imagine the defendant saying this exact same thing, because they made a mistake, right? Now, granted, it was a criminal mistake that they couldn't take back, and they took someone else's life and they had to pay for it. But this isn't the ferocious type of murder that is typically more interesting. I'm not saying that, her death was less important. It's just more typical of normal human interactions that we see, right?
Yeah. Yeah, this was something, I do think the jury got it right, which I don't always agree with that. I think, in terms of what was presented to them and the choices that they had to make, I do think this crime had aggravating circumstances.
I agree. I do agree with what decisions were made. I can also see how a different district attorney for the state could have gone a completely different way with it. But again, this is 2003.
Right.
And it's in Oklahoma. I'm sure that there was reasoning behind every decision that was made. I'm just not so sure, especially given what we just heard, you just quoted from that article, and that was in July, right before he was executed in August.
Right.
It's pretty obvious that the whole capital realm crime was unnecessary, right? Except, I mean, I respect the fact that it happened. I'm just saying that it didn't have to happen for justice to be served. He was living the justice, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. And there are accounts, and I'll tell you, Carlos Cuesto Rodriguez is an interesting one to read about. There's a lot of information about him out there. Articles have been written about this case, both from the pro and anti-death penalty perspectives. There's a lot of court documents. It's an interesting rabbit hole with only the single murder happening in there, but there is some other domestic violence. There are restraining orders with previous partners, but there's a lot to read about him. And it does look like to some degree he thrived in the institutional setting of being on death row. And like, there's positive things said about him and how he treated, inmates and staff. I don't, that's, is that enough for mercy? I don't know.
Well, I think that sort of the ultimate type of thing that I imagine this guy was, the ultimate thing that happens to them is they kill somebody that they love.
Yeah.
And that's what it takes to realize like a lot of things, right, about themselves. And he was probably surprised. And the fact that, he was drinking tequila, because I don't know, I feel like sometimes people can be surprised at their own boundaries. Like in this case, having shot her in both of her eyes, that was probably very startling to him. And it was in a way like a wake-up call that was, far too late as far as what he was focused on in his life at that moment, which was that he and his girlfriend had bought a house and they were, moving forward to have a life together. And he, it talks about how he thought she was cheating on him.
Yeah.
And so he had, animosity and he was vengeful, it seems. But it was ultimately a wake-up call, because as soon as the tequila was out of his system, he had to have realized, like, I can't believe I did that. Right. And instantaneous regret. And, that's why thriving in the institutional setting, that's exactly what I would expect, because they're like, sometimes you do something so atrocious, which I've had small, like, I've never killed anybody or hurt anyone, but I've had like small examples of things where like I'm really surprised at myself come up. But I think it's the same type of thing. And that's why he was trying to deal with life going forward, knowing he had crossed this line. And he was basically, in a way, trying to pay penance or repent for what he'd done by realizing, like, I really could get too out of hand and I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, and it turns out to be too little too late. I can't imagine. So this guy's, when this is happening, he's 47, 48 years old when he's committing the crime, and he's 70 now.
Yep. And so is it. And he never had a chance to have love again. So I imagine he would say, she was the love of my life, maybe. I don't know. I'm just saying they bought a house together, right?
She was certainly, like, his treatment of her was the end of his life. It just took a long time getting there.
Well, and I think that you can be surprised in relationships when you have normal fights, and people sometimes do get aggressive and out of hand. And a lot of times it does involve tequila or drugs, right?
Yes.
And then I think that, the reason she stayed, which, like we heard, her plan was she was going to leave because things were getting bad, right? But they had just bought this house together. But that your partner has a line that they won't cross, right?
Right.
Where you can... Now, granted, I would not tolerate the volatility of having this type of relationship, but, like, it's a pretty normal thing. I've seen it in other people have relationships where fighting is just sort of normal, and I wouldn't be able to tolerate that. But I do realize that a lot of times it's taken for granted,
right,
that they won't go there, right?
Like the level of trust that the two of you have, like he may be an abusive, gigantic asshole, but like he is not going to murder me.
Right, exactly. And I feel like that is the case in like just like 99.9% of textbook domestic cases. And most of the time it has to do with some sort of like outside influence like tequila, right?
Correct.
And
or
it's
meth.
It's a surprise to everybody involved that it went that far. And those are really tragic and unfortunate circumstances. But any of us, under the right circumstances, could end up in a position on either side of that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that makes this interesting is that this is going to sound terrible. Other than the end, it is a boring murder. It's that second shot and the cruelty of shooting her in her eyes that like... And I do, by the way, I believe him that he didn't know how to handle a pistol in the moment and that he was either hungover or still drunk or still high on something else that he had been taking with the tequila. And I fully believe that he could have pointed the firearm at her face and without realizing it, shot her. And then that other choice, though, that's the brutality that was in there simmering. That other choice was to pull the trigger again.
Right. And, we don't know what exactly happened except what was put forth. And honestly, the trial is clearly a facade, right? I mean, the whole thing is, I'm not saying... In
this incident, the trial and the appeals are the facade.
Right. And it's all going through the legal process because I don't think he's ever professed any sort of innocence. So...
No, there's nothing about innocence here at all. The family does come out and they speak afterwards about this shouldn't be his legacy, but like ultimately this is the last act that he'll be known for to a degree. I mean, so if you're one of those people that likes to know the very, very end of things, he is executed, lethal injection, August 13th of 2026. His last meal was a Cuban sandwich, Rocky Road ice cream, donuts, and a bottle of water, if you want to know those things. But the family does come out afterwards, and they basically say, we hate that this is his legacy because there was more to him. And they sort of back up a lot of the things that you had said, and that is that, this volatility came from the substance use and PTSD, and these injuries that he'd had were the cause of the substance use because he was always trying to kill that pain. And they make no excuses for him. They just say there was more to him than this. And that's one of the things that made him an interesting rabbit hole for me. Do you have any more on Carlos?
So he was the first execution of August 13th this year, 2026.
Yeah. So moving on from 1013, we have to go over to Anthony Hines at 1043. So just to talk about what he did for a second, there's a couple of places I pulled from here. I pulled from a local paper called the Nashville Banner. They covered the execution right after the fact. And I used Justia, which is the U.S. Supreme Court case catalog. I pulled a summary of this one to talk to you about. And there are a couple of opinions written on this. It has a holding. In March of 1985, Anthony Darrell Dugard Hines, so a lot of words there, is carrying a concealed hunting knife, and he checks into a motel. He walks in, and this young lady, Catherine Jean Jackson Jenkins, has been put in charge of the motel as sort of a stand-in. So she has a bag of money that's involved. Another visitor is going to find Miss Jenkins' body in a guest room with multiple knife wounds. Her money, her keys, and the car that she was driving at the time are missing. So a group of travelers are going to pick up Anthony Hines hitchhiking beside Miss Jenkins' broken down car. He has dried blood on his shirt, and according to all the testimony we get, his story doesn't make any sense, and at times it's just contradicting himself. He admits to his sister that he had stabbed somebody at this motel that he was at. and that he has a lot of money on him, and he has the keys to Miss Jenkins' car. He changes his story when he surrenders to the police, but he says, I'm going to confess only if you guarantee I will get the death penalty. This is all in 1985. We've heard those words before. A search of Hines' motel room reveals like stab marks and materials, and this other person that was there testifies that he knows the motel's owners, and he had stopped by because he wanted to check in on something. He had taken a key from the office, and then he had gone into Hines' room to use the bathroom, which is kind of weird. And this gets stressed to the jury, this odd sequence of events. So the jury hears enough discrepancies going on between what Jones has said, what Hines has said, and how the first responders talk about this. When Anthony Hines is looking for a post-conviction review, he actually gets this guy, Jones, to admit that he was at the motel with a woman other than his wife, and that he had given himself a room key to like basically go and like have a little party pad. Now, the woman comes forward, admits all of this happening. Anthony Hines' attorney had been aware of this affair from this witness, and they didn't bring it forward at the time of the trial because basically they didn't want to embarrass this guy because he really isn't saying a whole lot incriminating against Anthony Hines. And Anthony Hines has incriminated himself in completely different ways. So at some point in the middle of all this, he's able to get some relief.
It's a short-lived relief.
Yeah, he gets some habeas relief, and it looks like he's ultimately going to get possibly a new trial based on his attorneys essentially holding back the affair as being an alternative suspect defense. Now, the Supreme Court is going to rule that when the Sixth Circuit, like in the U.S. federal system, grants habeas relief regarding this potential ineffective assistance of counsel, the Supreme Court's going to go, you know what, even if people had heard about this guy's affair, it's a fairly innocent thing, and it was well documented. Not only that, it gave us more witnesses that seemed to bolster the alibi of the potential secondary suspect here, and we don't think that that is a reason to keep moving forward on this. Does that about sum it up from what you've read?
Right. And if I'm not mistaken, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals granting him a new trial happened in 2020. Is that right?
Right, yeah.
Okay, and so that's way later, right? And so It was just 1 year later that the U.S. Supreme Court said, hey, there's plenty of evidence. It's overwhelming. There is no reason. Yeah, exactly.
To give the Sixth Circuit a little like what they were thinking, and I guess they're due. They thought, if he had had a slightly more aggressive attorney, this would have changed the whole outcome of the case because it would have cast doubt on the witness's credibility. And I get that in one light, but all of this sort of does feel like a Hail Mary.
I was going to say, like, the evidence of him, he took her vehicle, he had her blood on him, like, that outweighs the credibility of the witness that found the victim.
I think so, too. Yeah.
It's not going, the fact that, like, his attorney didn't go interview that guy and he was kind of kept out of the limelight, it was fine because it was not important.
Yeah, so this one, I will say there are some good court documents to read in the Hines case. But here's the thing about it. From the beginning, there's not really a question that Anthony Hines killed Catherine Jenkins, in my opinion. Did you see any question in there where you go, I think it could have been these other people?
No, because of the evidence. I mean, if something were to come up to challenge the evidence, that would be different. But to me, I haven't seen anything that challenged it because he had not only, he also had money that he had stolen, right?
Right.
And so it lined up to literally a robbery gone bad.
So this is what I'll say about his case. According to all the attorneys who spoke about this in the last 5 years, he has maintained his innocence for 40 years. That's not exactly true. Early on, he kind of makes some incriminating statements, but not confessions. Am I saying that right?
I mean, yeah, and honestly, I feel like I could see why somebody would say that, but maintaining innocence across 4 decades is exactly what I would expect someone who had the money that the victim had, was seen with her vehicle, and had her blood on him would say.
Yeah. The article from the Nashville Banner wraps all of this up in kind of like the most terrible way humanly possible. That's not knocking the author. Mikhail Raylan wrote this August 13th, 2026. Obviously, that's the day we're dealing with. Here's a little bit from that article. On Thursday morning at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution, the state executed Anthony Darrell Dugard Hines for the March 1985 murder of Catherine Jean Jackson Jenkins. He's been on death row for 40 years. Hines, 66, was accompanied in the execution chamber by Diana Gallagher, his spiritual advisor. From the witness room, his son, whom Hines' attorney said he met for the first time 4 days ago, joined a group of reporters who served as witnesses. When the witnesses entered the room at 10:21 a.m., they could hear a female voice singing. At 10:30 a.m., the curtains opened and witnesses saw Hines stretched out horizontally across the gurney. Hines was paralyzed on his left side because of a series of strokes during the winter. Wednesday, his attorney sought a temporary restraining order preventing the state from bending his left arm during the execution, but witnesses could not see his left side, and his arm was covered with a blanket. Soon after the curtains opened, Hines was asked if he had a last statement. He said, "Not right now, thank you." Gallagher began to recite the Lord's Prayer with her hand on his shoulder. According to witnesses, Hines lay still, visibly emotional. Then he uttered his last words. Tennessee Department of Correction Commissioner Frank Strada said they were, "Tell my son hello." But witnesses said, he said, "Tell my son I love him." Soon after, Hines asked, "How long do I have?" Diane Gallagher said that she didn't know. Hines' breathing soon became labored. The color drained from his face. Gallagher, who prayed for both Hines and the Jenkins family throughout the process, prayed again, saying, teach us how to love one another. Amen." According to witnesses, Hines' son muttered, "Amen," along with her. At 10:42, the curtains to the chamber closed, and at 10:43 a.m., the doctor pronounced Anthony Hines dead. Witnesses could not see if the doctor was Mark Walton Fowler, who had recently overseen the aborted execution of Tony Carruthers in May. So they give us the story again, kind of the same thing. You can pull this up on the Nashville Banner because it is worth reading, but I'm kind of at the end here with my Hines stuff. I do find it interesting. I do want to read it. I don't see any evidence of his innocence, but I also don't feel as strongly about this case as I did Carlos's case. But I wanted to bring up the fact that the next person scheduled to be executed in Tennessee is Krista Pike. She's scheduled to be executed on September 30th, and I'm interested to see what people have to say when that happens.
Right. She's the only woman currently on Tennessee's death row, correct?
Correct. And she is interesting. I don't know if I want to go deep into her case here. There's a lot going on where people have definitely come out to support her in droves, largely because of mitigating circumstances related to what happened to her as a child. For those of you who don't know anything about her, in 1995, when she was 18 years old, she murdered Colleen Stemmer in Knoxville, who was a 19-year-old Job Corps classmate. And so Krista and then two friends, I guess you could call them that, they lure Colleen into the woods, they beat her, they torture her, and they kill her. She was sentenced to death at 20 years old in 1996, which made her one of, if not the youngest women to be sentenced to death in the United States. Definitely one of the youngest since post-Furman. So her execution coming up, that was sort of tied to Anthony Hines here. Did you have a lot of opinion on Anthony Hines and like how this? I got so first of all, we're executing older people, and
He was 66, right?
right, and he was not doing great health wise.
Right, 'cause they said he'd had a stroke.
Yeah.
Yeah, he couldn't move his left side, and not really. I think that in this case, unless again I've missed it somewhere, the actual evidence has never been challenged, right? And it's good, firm evidence, right?
I've gone through it, and that's what it looks like to me too. Yeah.
Okay, and so there's actual physical evidence that links him to the victim and to her murder. And he has basically, in not showing remorse and not admitting guilt, I don't feel like he solidly maintained innocence, but that's what was said. And so in doing that, I mean, sometimes the person really is innocent, but I would say like in cases where there's solid evidence like this, it's exactly what I expect from a perpetrator, right?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it was a vicious killing for, I think he may have robbed her with the intention of killing her, but like sometimes that stuff just happens, right?
Yeah.
It's actually typically not, you're not going to kill somebody that you rob because they're two completely different crimes, right? And
Yeah.
I never heard if she was sexually assaulted or not.
It's not a focal point in all of this. It's more of a robbery thing.
Well, and we've talked about how like there's this time period where a lot of cases I feel like were probably sexual assaults. It just doesn't come up for whatever reason. It's really
Yes.
strange.
Yep.
And I think 85, it could have been that way. I'm not sure. But honestly, this is exactly what I would expect. I was satisfied with the evidence here, and I never saw it firmly challenged. So if I saw it firmly challenged and something about it fell through and was not as firm as it seemed, that would be different. But from what I've seen, I feel like the Sixth Circuit reprieve was, I mean, it was some fancy lawyering, right?
I think it was like the Hail Mary. I think it was literally the only way to get him maybe commuted to life in prison, which this is going to sound horrible, but I think it would have been worse if he was having the series of strokes they describe, and then he's on death row, and then it's suddenly life without parole instead, and you're on a prison medical ward trying to deal with you having serious disability. I think that would be worse than the death penalty.
Well, and I agree, but I don't necessarily think that comes into play.
No, it doesn't.
To death or not, but
no, that's just me.
No, I agree with what you're saying. As far as personally, I feel like we're putting him out of his misery, so to speak, because he was having a hard time. The U.S. Supreme Court, they undid the reprieve, which is exactly how law works, right? You've got appeals courts that make decisions based on what they feel like is right, and if the Supreme Court, they could have not taken it. They could have said, let it stand, but they didn't. They undid the remand, right? And they said, no, that's not how that should go. He was guilty. He doesn't get a new trial. And that's how our system of law works here, right?
Right.
And so I think that he made an unfortunate decision. I would have been just as fine with him spending the rest of his life in jail as being put to death. But this is a case where, having reviewed a lot of the information and seen the challenges that were brought, I mean, because even in the Sixth Circuit appeal that was essentially granted, they're not arguing anything about actual innocence, right? They're not arguing anything about the the evidence being somehow not what it was, right?
Right. Well, if we were going to look at this from the perspective of actual innocence, there's probably an angle in here somewhere. That's not what we're doing today. I really wanted to tell the stories of all the people that are connected to this like triple execution thing. And this is the one of the three cases that we're talking about today. This is the one I might like swing back around to and be like, all right, show me what happened here. But like, there's so many coincidences that have to happen for this guy carrying the hunting knife to sort of be set up for this murder that like, I never got there. Like reading through it all, I'm not saying he did it or didn't do it. I'm saying he was convicted of it. And I feel like the conviction itself, everything looks lawful, actual innocence or not. I think I would have looked at it more from the perspective of whether or not, based on all the reporting on him, he was maybe somehow intellectually deficient. Like, it looks like they kind of touch on that along the way, but they never get fully into it. I just didn't look at the Anthony Hines case and go, you know what? That guy might have been an innocent guy that was executed. Nothing about it gave me that feeling.
I did not get that feeling. It was very thoroughly litigated, even up to, I mean, for a 1985 case, having, a 2020 appeal and then a 2021 U.S. Supreme Court opinion. It was thoroughly litigated.
Yeah.
And that is our system, right?
Yeah, and it's one of those things, like, I don't know that, I don't know that I would have supported executing him. If you convert it to life without parole, personally, I feel like that would have been cruel and unusual too. But what's interesting about his case is it's sort of, if you track it back through all the things that have happened in the federal and state court system, it shows you this pattern of these people that are making arguments because they have some kind of pro-human stance against the system, and they feel trapped, I think, and like not able to help someone maybe, and they are kind of focused on attempting to just get someone not executed. Does that make sense? They throw so many resources, so much money at it. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but that becomes an interesting stance to take. Like, we don't care what he did. We don't want the state to execute him.
Right. And that would be people who are anti-death penalty, right?
Correct.
And I would not classify myself as someone who's anti-death penalty, as far as we don't want the government killing someone that has been rightfully convicted and sentenced to death. I'm okay with that in situations that it all, like, every single thing I just said is met, right?
Yeah.
It's the cases where, like, and we're always seeing them in retrospect, right? Because we have seen a couple like that we were like, well, is this going to happen? And kind of waited to see, like, because, there's nothing we can do about it, right?
Correct.
I mean, from our stance, where our perspective, where we're at talking about it, that's the best we can do. But like, I've had a couple close calls on just from doing our show where I've thought to myself, they're about to execute an innocent person, and that might change my mind. I do not. If we decided through legislation of whatever type, which has happened before in the United States, that the death penalty was going to be taken off the table as a form of punishment,
Yeah.
I would not fight that, right? I feel like people who are anti-death penalty, that's the route they should probably be going, where they just say, you know what, we're never going to have death sentences. The reason that we keep it, it's supposed to be for the worst of the worst crimes, right?
Yes.
It's supposed to serve as a deterrent for the worst of the worst crimes.
Correct.
And I don't know that either one of the two cases that we've talked about, the executions of the perpetrator on August 13th, 2026, I don't necessarily know that it served its purpose in deterring like the worst of the worst crimes. They were atrocious crimes, right?
Yeah.
But I could go either way as far as, I don't feel like either one of them were wrongly executed, and it would have made no difference to me if they had spent the rest of their life in jail instead.
Yeah, and so it's interesting that you say that, because we're coming to the end of the day, August 13th, 2026, and I'm going to go ahead and give you a warning. I have none of those thoughts about our next candidate, and if you don't like child murder or trafficking or abuse of any kind, physical, sexual, or otherwise, now's the time to bow out. Because for the rest of this episode, I see these cases, they come up, I know they're real. I have been involved in investigating a similar type case, and I can tell you right now, these are the worst of the worst that you're talking about, Meg. And do you think that's an accurate description of what we're...
Yes.
Yeah. We got to go down to Georgia for a minute. November 23rd, 2016. Little girl is born. Her name is Kamari Holland. She's going to be living in Columbus, Georgia in December of 2021, right before Christmas, right after her birthday, right after Thanksgiving. And the only thing I can explain to people about how this happens is adults make bad decisions that lead to children being in horrifying situations. Christy Marie Seipel, also known as Christy Hoskins, is Kamari Holland's mother. She's been in a relationship with a guy named Jeremy Williams, who also supplies her with a copious amounts of drugs and expects her to pay for them. And she's gotten into debt with Mr. Williams. The weird thing about getting into debt is that you then can't get the supply of the thing that you need when you have issues with, in this case, methamphetamine. On December 13th of 2021, where she's going to see the worst possible thing that can happen with her substance abuse problem. So December 12th, 2021, she makes a deal with this guy, her dealer / person that she has sex with, Jeremy Williams. And that deal is for the roughly $1,500 that she owes him. He is going to be allowed to pay a little bit more and take her 5-year-old daughter out of her home in Columbus, Georgia, and do whatever he wants with her for the night. And they have limits that they put in place. The limits are only oral sex. So that's how Christy justifies what she's doing. And they go back and forth negotiating over this. And ultimately, Jeremy Williams decides if that's going to be the case, he does not want to pay the $2,500 on top of forgiving her debt. He reduces it to something like $1,300 that he later admits he was never going to pay. For those of you who don't know, this was all caught on video, the transactions themselves, and then what he does next. And he has this abandoned home down in Phoenix City, Alabama. So Jeremy Williams, the night of December 12th, 2021, into the morning of December 13th, 2021, takes 5-year-old Kamari Holland to this abandoned house, vacant house, whatever you want to call it. And he then films himself smoking her out on methamphetamine, meaning he's teaching this 5-year-old girl how to smoke methamphetamine, and then follows her around with his phone camera as she feels the effects of the methamphetamine. He engages in sodomy and oral sex, also filming this, and he rapes this 5-year-old girl. He films all of this. He also decides that he, smoking the meth himself, and this little girl is now on meth, he can't possibly let this little girl go home to her mother after what he's done to her. And she's crying, bleeding, and then unconscious. She regains consciousness, and he strangles her. Also films that. And if that is not bad enough, he continues to violate her dead body and also films that. So the morning after this goes on, so December 12th into December 13th, all this is happening. He does not bring Kamari Holland back to her mother, Christy. So Christy reports her missing. Christy starts telling these stories about when she last saw her 5-year-old daughter, roughly before she went to sleep at midnight, and she awoke and the front door was open and the daughter was gone. An extensive search is conducted. Everyone is looking for this little girl, and her body is found in the house in Phoenix City, Alabama. It is very clear to everyone who responds that she has been brutally assaulted in all of the worst ways possible. And as they're trying to deal with mom and trying to deal with the situation, they're pretty easily able to identify that Jeremy Tremaine Williams is responsible. They end up arresting him for murder shortly after. So that's the crime that we're dealing with on the third person here. And I got to tell you, reading about crimes like this, they're very difficult. That's the reason I throw like a warning out. Like someone doing that to a 5-year-old girl who in the videos that they present of her is just an adorable little kid who has absolutely no control over her circumstances.
Yeah, that's really hard.
And this is a 37-year-old man at the time of the crime, just so like people know in 2021 when this is all happening. Jeremy Williams is 37 years old. He is charged with capital murder of a child under the age of 14. Subsequently, they will add charges on, which include capital murder during a kidnapping, capital murder during a rape. The offense of capital murder in Alabama, you go one or two ways. Life without parole, or you get the death penalty. Rick Chauncey is the deputy district attorney who announces that the prosecution is seeking the death penalty. But they point out that he's previously been charged with child abuse in 2009. A jury acquitted him in 2012. And I don't know if you heard this, but he's also a suspect in the killing of his 1-month-old daughter in January 2005 up in North Pole, Alaska.
Yep, I was aware of that, but the charges weren't brought until 2022.
Right. So on December 28th of 2021, they also arrest mom, Christy Seipel. She's arrested as an alleged co-defendant in her daughter's death. On December 29th, the day after her arrest, she's charged with 1 count each of sex trafficking, felony murder during a kidnapping, felony murder during rape, felony murder during sodomy. Before it's revealed that she's involved in the rape murder, she took part in an interview pretending to be the heartbroken, mournful mother, which she probably is, but she put her daughter in this position. She claimed that Holland had been everything, I think she used the word the essence of her life. She was unable to process what had happened here. And these situations infuriate me. And they obviously made some people mad enough that in March 2022, the grand jury formally indicts them on all of these charges. Williams has 8 charges, 4 counts of capital murder for kidnapping, rape, and sodomy, and killing someone under the age of 14, 2 counts of sex trafficking, producing child pornography, and abuse of a corpse, Mom is indicted on 3 counts of felony murder and 2 counts of sex trafficking. And this is where it starts to come out in 2022 that there's all these other things going on. After the arrest for this, the investigators in the death of his 1-month-old daughter, Nadia Williams, they turn around, like you said, they present it to a grand jury. He's going to be indicted in December 2022. In relation to that case, we now have people from Alaska and people from Alabama and Georgia going back and forth trying to figure out what all this guy has done. March 26th of 2022, he's once again arraigned in court on new sexual abuse charges, which consisted of rape, sodomy, and sexual abuse of a child under the age of 6, because he's found to have done this before. So before his trial is set to commence, motions start to be filed on his behalf by his lawyers and by himself. He requests to be removed from suicide watch. He had experienced this for nearly 10 months after prison authorities deemed his behavior was suicidal from the time of his arrest. He tried to hang himself. I got to be honest, that might have been the best thing for all of us.
Well, I feel like he knew that. I think that after a little bit, the meth brain recovers.
And you realize what you've done. Yeah.
What am I doing? Like, what on earth? Because I think a lot of the actions we heard about, like, I'm not saying he's a great person because he absolutely was not, but I think a lot of it is the meth.
Yeah, it's definitely the meth. Yeah, this is as methy as it gets. This whole thing is screams drug use and terrible person.
It really does, yeah.
So we don't have to wait too long to find out what happens to Mom. Christy pleads guilty to sex trafficking. She admits to that, faces 20 years in prison. That's on March 13th, 2024. The prosecution dropped the murder charge against her, so she's not facing the death penalty personally. July 18th, she's sentenced to 20 years and a $10,000 fine. This sentence is backdated to essentially give her credit for everything, but she's going to be required to register as a sex offender. She's got to pay a couple of fines and fees. She gets off easy for what she did here, but I think they weighed into her serious substance abuse disorder and the fact that it's her own daughter.
Well, and I genuinely believe that, and I'm not saying anything about what she did was okay, but I don't think that the ultimate outcome ever crossed her mind.
No.
And I think that, again, it largely had to do with meth brain, right?
Yeah.
As far as, what she was agreeing to was unthinkable. But at the same time, it had a different I can't even say that it's not just as bad, honestly, but the death was unexpected, but the torture that she was going to allow her daughter to endure, in her mind at least, had to have seemed different, right? And I don't know if you're aware, but it came out that Kamari's father was not going to be allowed to attend the execution. Are you aware of this?
Yeah.
And Corey Holland, he was not allowed to attend the execution of his young daughter's rapist and killer because he had violated the custody order before her death. And that's the only reason that Christy had Kamari to begin with.
Because he wanted her to be able to spend some time at Christmas with her daughter.
He explained that, yes, he violated the order because he wanted his children to have proper childhoods, and that in his mind included seeing their mother. And he said that and this is a quote, "and not to put that monster on a pedestal, but I always thought she loved my kids and would never let anyone harm them. And I want to iterate again that I never knew she was doing hard drugs," end quote. And so I'm not really sure that I follow all that. I'm not in the position to be the one putting my foot down on that, but essentially it's not wrong. I'm not sure that should keep him from the execution, but it did apparently. I haven't seen anything. In fact, yeah, I'm pretty sure that his quote was from the day the guy was executed. So,
yeah. So they actually charge him. They charge Corey Holland with child endangerment.
Right.
That ends up being the reason he's not allowed to witness the executions, because he's charged with a felony.
Right. And so he's going to pay for the rest of his life for the biggest mistake that he ever made. And the man clearly would have never wanted to put his child in harm's way. He has, I say an excuse. There's no reason for any action to be taken against him. He will regret what he did for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And, I can only imagine the pain that he would feel. But I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that side of all this.
Yeah. Williams ends up waiving his rights to appeal. Like, one attorney gets in and starts an appeal process, and then it takes them about a year to waive everything.
Right. And so he pled guilty and he said, "I want to be put to death." And then he was sentenced accordingly. Right.
Right.
So that wasn't a plea deal. That was him pleading guilty and a judge making that determination. And I feel like this was, I feel like the judge probably didn't even have to think about it.
Yeah, no, the judge in the initial setup didn't have to think about it at all. He just accepted the guilty plea, took a little time to hear what the state and wanted to say about it, and then basically let the victims come in and give impact statements and sentence them to death. That's in April of 2024. And keeping
in mind that a lot of this was videoed, right, by the defendant.
Correct.
And there was a lot of really solid information. And this was one of the most heinous crimes that and I didn't even look deep into it. It was just skimming the surface. It is so awful. This is exactly what the death penalty was designed for, right? It is designed to deter people from doing this type of conduct, from committing these types of heinous acts on anyone, much less young children, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, this guy, I don't even care what his last meal was. I don't care what his last words were. I do not care anything about this particular killer, other than the fact that knowing he has been executed, the world is a slightly better place. This, where he has filmed these acts, he has done this to a child, all of the transactional nature of this, the way he talks on these videos, everything about this, I care nothing for him. Good riddance to bad fucking rubbish.
Special consideration was given to True Crime Excess by LabRottiCreations.com. If you have a moment in your favorite app, please go on and give us a review or a 5-star rating. It helps us get noticed in the crowd. This is True Crime XS.
You fall like the stars. I break things like guitars. Thick skin, no scars. We're in trouble, we took it too far. I don't want to go, but it's 'cause I'll disappoint ya. It's all I've ever dreamed of, something I cannot let go of. I hate the competition, this culture's like a gym, and I I lost the motivation to get fit in your expectations.
True Crime Excess is brought to you by John and Meg. It's written, produced, edited, and posted by John and Meg. You can always support True Crime Excess through patreon.com, or if you have a story you'd like them to cover, you can reach them at truecrimeaccess.com. Thank you for joining us.